G'day Gear Junkies, Jason here. Today I'm going to be looking at a lot of orange Boss distortion pedals. I'm going to be tracking their development from the late 70s through to the present day. But just to be clear, I will not be talking about any of the metal pedals or pedals aimed at metal players. I'll give these guys their own video. And I'm also not going to talk about any sort of random distortion pedals like the XT2. Again, I might put those in their own video. But before I begin, if you like this kind of content, please help me out by subscribing. And remember, you can support this channel by going to the Middle Aged Gear Junkie store and buying some merchandise. It really helps. In the 60s and early 70s, distortion pedals as we know them today did not exist. The closest thing we had to a distortion pedal were fuzz pedals. Now, if you know much about fuzz is a bit different to distortion because it distorts all of the frequencies evenly, leaving you with a very woolly and very compressed sound. Now, in the mid-70s, some companies started playing around with an electrical component called an operational amplifier, or op-amp. Two such companies brought out distortion pedals that were based around the op-amp, and that was the MXR Distortion Plus and the DoD Preamp 250. Boss is a very young company at this time. They released their first pedal in 1976, and then they released the first three of their compact series of pedals in 1977. In 1978, they add 4 new pedals to the compact line. One of them was this guy, the Boss DS-1. Now, love it or hate it, the DS-1 here is the biggest selling pedal of all time, selling over 10 million units. It has been on sale non-stop since 1978, making it Boss's longest running pedal. The DS-1 has a couple of quirks about it. One, it's very, very compressed. Once you get the distortion up past halfway, you're not really adding more distortion, you're just adding more compression. And you can really hear it and feel it when you play that the volume of the pedal really squishes down quite hard when you hit the strings hard. This pedal has a very infamous tone control. It's a bit similar to the Big Muff tone control. When you turn it down, it actually cuts top end and boosts bass. And then as you turn it up, it boosts top end and cuts bass at the same time. So it is very tricky to dial it in to get that right balance of upper frequencies and lower frequencies. Usually it's in the first half of that sweep. The DS-1 has been around so long that there have been some minor design changes to it. So the original spec of this pedal was from 1978 when it was released through to 1993. In 1994, they changed the op-amp that was being used in it. And it's been through a few changes since. Now, I tried to make a video a couple of years ago comparing this Japanese-made one to a model that was made in 2004 in Taiwan. Here's a little clip from that video that I never released. So the one over here on the left, this is the Japanese one. We'll start with that. All right, and the Taiwanese. I actually preferred the 2004 model because I found it a little less fizzy than the Japanese one. You'll hear a lot of people online saying that if you can't get a good sound out of the DS-1, it's because you don't know how to use it. Some people claim that they're actually designed to be used in the effects loop of your amplifier. I find this very hard to believe because this came out in the 70s and hardly any amplifiers, if any at all, had an effects loop. So I doubt that they would have designed this to go into your effects loop. Now this got me to thinking about the amplifiers that were around in the late 70s. There were no high gain amplifiers, or at least high gain by today's standards. If you wanted a really high gain tone, what you had to do was crank your amp up, start to get a bit of natural saturation, and then add some sort of fuzz box or distortion box in front of it to get even more gain. Now, the problem is that when you crank some of those amplifiers up, they do become a little bit dark sounding. And that's, I think, why this tone control works probably a little bit better going into an amplifier that's already driving as opposed to going into the clean channel of an amplifier. So up until this point, all the examples I've played have been into the clean channel of my Marshall DSL40. Now I'm going to put it in front of the crunch channel of the DSL40. Now, the DS-1 has been used by every man and his dog. I'm sure everybody watching this right now has either owned one or does own one currently. They were used by players like Satriani and Vi back in the 80s, and a certain Kurt Cobain became a big fan of this and used it all over Nirvana's album Bleach. Now, the next orange distortion pedal that Boss brought out was not the DS-2, but the DF-2 Super Feedbacker and Distortion, or Super Distortion and Feedbacker, depending on which version you own. Now, the DF-2 here came out early in the Japanese era Part 2. This was really characterized by the uniform 4 knobs. But the DS-1 only had 3 knobs. It had distortion, tone, and level. And this has those same 3 knobs. So they needed to add a 4th control to make it, well, uniform. So what they did was they took a DS-1 style circuit and added an overtone control. The way this overtone control works is that if you have it on the left-hand side of halfway, you get a low overtone. If you turn it up past halfway, you get an overtone that's probably about an octave higher than the low one. And you activate it by holding down the switch. So this is a really unique feature to this pedal. This is one of the first Boss pedals to use an integrated foot switch, meaning that the foot switch could be used for more than just turning it off or on. And they wouldn't use this trick again until they released the feedback booster in the 2010s. The Boss DF-1 was made from 1984 and discontinued in 1994. In 1985, Boss bring out the OD2 Turbo Overdrive. This had a mode selector which was turbo on and turbo off. With the turbo on, you got a bit more saturation and it slightly changed the frequency response. Now, 2 years later, Boss used this as inspiration for their new DS pedal, which was the DS-2. The DS-2 is a bit different to the OD2. With the OD2, you had a standard mode and then a higher gain mode. I assumed that this was going to be the same sort of thing, but it's not. So mode 1 is like a more refined version of the DS-1. It's not quite as compressed as the DS-1, and the tone control is a lot more generic and usable. Mode 2, however, instead of being a higher gain mode, actually gives you a huge boost in some mid-range frequencies that almost sounds a bit nasal. Now, those frequencies don't sound particularly good when you play chords, but when you're playing single notes and lead lines, it really does help to thicken those notes up a bit. A cool feature that this pedal has that the OD2 doesn't have is the remote jack. So you can plug in an external foot switch like this, and you can actually toggle between the two different modes. Usually when Boss bring out a new model, it replaces the model that came before it. But owing to the sheer popularity of the DS-1, it never went out of production. But funnily enough, neither has the DS-2. Both of these two pedals are still available today. I think that a lot of the popularity surrounding this pedal is owed to Kurt Cobain. This was the pedal that he used for the album Nevermind. Not only that, but John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers is a big fan of this pedal, having two of them on his board. In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a new musical craze that was taking over the world. It was called nu metal. It was typified by a really muddy, thick distortion sound, usually played on 7-string guitars. Now, wanting to capitalize on this, Boss released a new distortion pedal that was aimed at these players called the Mega Distortion. The MD-2 here is supposed to be the highest gain pedal that Boss have ever made. Not only does it have a distortion knob, but it also has a gain boost knob as well. So you can boost the gain going into the distortion circuit here. The tone stack on this pedal is unique amongst Boss pedals. In the middle we have a standard tone knob, and it sounds a little bit fizzy, a bit like a metal zone, but around the outside we have another control called bottom, and this adds extra bottom end to your tone to get you that nu metal mud tone. Now, because this is basically designed for deep tunings, I'm going to play my chord, which I've got tuned down to drop C. The MD-2 holds the distinction of being the only Boss pedal made between 1999 and 2013 that was analog. Every other pedal that came out during this time was digital, which is why I call this period the digital era. The MD-2 is still made today. Boss brought out several different drive pedals during the digital era. Right near the end of the digital era, they released the Adaptive Distortion DA-2. This uses a type of processing which they called multi-dimensional processing. From what I could find out about this pedal, what it does is it divides your signal up into the frequency bandwidth and then distorts different parts of the signal different amounts to get a very precise sound. Now, I know that sounds very complicated, but I think they actually managed it. Out of all of the pedals that I've played so far, this is definitely the most precise sounding. I actually enjoyed this pedal the most when I had the gain down below halfway. Funnily enough though, this had a very, very short life. It was made between 2013 and 2014. Now because of that, it's a semi-rare pedal and the prices have gone up accordingly. In 2014, we saw the beginning of what I call the retrospective era. This is Boss looking to the past for inspiration on their new designs. One of the first pedals to come out in the retrospective era was the Boss DS-1x. Now this is a kind of crossover between the digital era and the retrospective era. It looks back to the original DS-1, but it's digital. Although they don't sound the same, the Boss DS-1x here uses the same multi-dimensional processor that the adaptive distortion had used a year earlier. I'm not sure if you can see on these examples here owing to the shiny control plate, but I'm running the treble or the high frequencies right down on this pedal because it's incredibly shrill. It sounds a bit like an original DS-1. Although this is supposed to hark back to the original DS-1, I would say it's a lot higher gain, it's a lot smoother, and it's a lot less compressed than a DS-1. For me, nothing typifies the retrospective era more than the Wazacraft series of pedals. Owing to their massive success, it was only a matter of time before we saw a Wazacraft DS-1. Over the years, the DS-1 has been a favorite of people who like to mod pedals. So basically, this is Boss's own mod on the DS-1. So in standard mode, you have a standard current day DS-1 style pedal. Then if you click it over to C mode or custom mode, you get a modified DS-1. This comes with a 6 dB boost, but it's also got a lot more mid-range and it's not quite as shrill. It's a more well-rounded distortion. To me, it still sounds like an op-amp style distortion. It just sounds a bit more refined. Like the original DS-1, I think this also sounds good going into an already overdriving amplifier. So that was all of Boss's orange distortion pedals. Let me know in the comments below if there's any that you really love, or if there's any information that I've left out of this video that I might find and other people might find interesting. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. You can support this channel by going to the Middle Aged Geek Junkie store and buying some merchandise, and you can also join the Middle Aged Geek Junkie Facebook page. Other than that, my name is Jason. Have a wonderful day. See you later.